Hi, I'm Pete, and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm, episode 6 of the Farmall 856 restoration. In the last episode, I stripped out that middle case and the torque amplifier and everything else that came out of the transmission. Parts are ordered for it and should be here in 4 or 5 days. In this video, I'm going to take you through how I do cleaning for a major casting assembly like this, both the casting itself and the guts that are inside of it. Old hat and coat for washing parts, and luckily it's warmer out than it was the last time when I did the whole tractor. That'll work. This is ATF mixed with cranberry juice. It works really well. I'm just kidding. It's red hot. I like red hot. Red hot is in the cleaner, not the sauce. This is a process of cleaning I started using when I did the Super C. I used to hang things up in the shop and clean them out with parts cleaning fluid and made a big mess. This works really well. It'd be nice if I had a hot water pressure washer, or even better, a steam pressure washer, but those things are expensive and kind of prone to a lot of maintenance. I found that the cold water works just fine to blast all the stuff off. A little degreaser after you get the most of it off, and you have a clean casting. It works really well. Next step in cleaning is grape juice, but remember, it has to be Welch's grape juice to work. Next step is just to get the bulk of the water out. I just take a rag and clean out the drops. Not much, blast the heat and that dries it out pretty good. Here's what the inside of the transmission case looks like. Got all the grit and the gunk out of there. In the bell housing, there's still, some blackness, but I think it's baked on stuff from the clutch. No big deal. I've blown them out with compressed air too. This one isn't such a big deal because the Gliptol paint inside, which is there to both seal the casting after they finish manufacturing so that any sand left on the casting doesn't wind up in the transmission oil. And it's also there to help oil from migrating through the casting and outside through any pores in the casting. Anyway, a little water on that, it'll just dry off and won't hurt it. But any machine surfaces like here at the end of the bell housing, I just take a little bit of regular old clean oil and rub on them because they start to flash rust pretty quick after they've had degreaser put on them. Do the same thing, put it on the bearing journals. Just a little bit of gasket residue left on here. We got a little bit of gasket material here on the underside to clean off. Might as well take care of this end of the tractor too while we're at it. Get the gaskets off of here. This is a putty knife that I sharpen so I can get an edge on it. I always clean out these blind bolt holes in castings. These got oil in them. You put a bolt down through there and that oil gets pressurized in the blind end. You can crack a casting. See this one, if you try and run a bolt down there, there's so much crud that you're going to wind up cracking the casting if you're not careful. Even if the threads aren't buggered up, this tends to pull a lot of dirt out of the hole. It goes in the flutes of the tap. Not too bad. This is lacquer thinner, and I find that it's good at taking off the final residue from the gasket. Lacquer thinner dissolves lots of glues and paints and all that kind of stuff. I believe this white stuff is some kind of gasket adhesive. I don't know. Let's try some lacquer thinner on and see what happens. That takes it off. It'll take the paint off too if I rub it long enough on there. I think that's pretty good. I'm going to just leave a slight oil coating on this one too, a very light oil coating to make sure it doesn't corrode until it's time for reassembly. The next step is the guts, which are all piled here on the bench. Clean them up, inspect them, take a look at all the bearings and gears, make sure everything's all right, and get them ready to put back in. First of all is the torque amplifier, which came out of the tractor looking like this, and I'd put a retaining bolt in here to hold this on. Once you pull the retaining bolt out, this comes off. It's called the quill, and it's got a bearing and a casting that need to come apart. This goes as a core back to the supplier, high capacity, red run right, for the new TA, and they'll wind up rebuilding this and using some of the castings and parts out of it. If you look a little closer at this quill, see this wear in here where the clutch discs have rode on certain parts of the gear. So I ordered a new quill for this TA. That's a pretty common thing to do when you replace the TA. So I have to take this apart in order to look at the bearing and get ready for the new quill gear installation. Then this gear should tap out of this casting. There. And then there's an interior snap ring to get off, to pull this gear off the quill. I figure probably when I do a dozen tractors, after I do that many, I'll buy a set of snap ring pliers. This part we'll reuse, and we'll reuse this bearing Here's all the parts of that quill assembly. This part is going to be replaced, the actual quill gear, along with the 2 sets of needle bearings that are inside it. They come with the torque amplifier kit. This gear that goes on the quill we'll reuse. Snap rings, this bearing, this casting with its needle bearing in it gets reused as well. This goes off because there's a $200 core charge on it. After cleaning, everything gets inspected. I go through every gear and I look for any cracks, weird wear, anything like that on the gear. Snap rings, pretty simple. Ball bearings, I check each of those out. I'm not one to just replace bearings just because I'm in there, because these are old International Harvester bearings and the quality on them is just, well, you never know what you're going to get these days. So this one is in extremely good shape. I check kind of the end play, I guess, play from race to race. There's almost none in that. And then I'll rotate the bearing around slow and look at the race as it's turning to look for any galling or corrosion or pitting in that. It takes a few minutes. And do the same thing with the outer race. You can look in there and see where the race is that the balls ride and look for similar imperfections. And then just slowly turn it all around. Try and look at the edges of the balls that are rotating in there and feel for any roughness in the bearing that might indicate a worn surface. This bearing is in great shape. Needle bearings are pretty simple. You just look for if there's any missing needles, which are not. It's normal to have a little bit of play between needles. This one is fine. Of course, the needles at the ends of them have little pegs that hold them up into these U-shaped races on either side. This feel, inspection, looks fine. These are 2 bearings that were left in the case when I finished disassembly and I had to take them out later. This needle bearing that I just cleaned that was in the case was about halfway down the case on the countershaft hole, and a couple people noted in the comments that they thought a needle was missing, but as I checked it out, there's not a needle missing. Just when you get this big of a needle bearing, you can get a little gap in there like that. But it's all fine. They're held true by the shaft that they ride on. This ball bearing was in the rear of the transmission case. And again, it is in perfect shape. I mean, there is no play in there. After cleaning, parts get arranged. Rear is on this end of the tractor, and front is over here. This is the gear that drives the MCV pump right in the front of the casting, and it has a cone bearing on it. And I'm not taking off, I'm just going to clean in place. Bearing main shaft. The rear bearing is in this cage here in the transmission main shaft, and I'm not taking it apart. You can tell how it is by just feeling it and that it's fine. big roller bearing in there, but we will clean it this way. Transmission countershaft and nut. Transmission countershaft gears and spacers. Wear from 50 years worth of shifting gears. Nothing to worry about there. That's normal. Just clean this, and this is an important little doodad to show. This sleeve and O-ring go right in here, and this tube here comes from the oil filter back here, the transmission oil filter, and goes up to the MCV pump. If this O-ring and sleeve isn't in good shape and in here, you'll start sucking air through this at times, and then you have problems with all your power steering and brakes and torque amplifier. Got to keep track of that. Yep. This is a gear that's got the transmission brake on it. And something special happens with this gear. This gear that I pulled out of the parts washer is a TA drive gear. It meshes with the TA right here. And since I'm getting a new TA, the new gear in here has to mesh properly with this gear, so when you get a new TA, you get a new gear that goes on the countershaft and meshes with this gear, and you send the old gear back with your core. I think this is my last piece of the gear set to take apart, inspect, clean up, and this is the PTO drive gear that comes into the clutch here. Cover comes off, there's a seal there, bearing, snap ring, another seal inside. This has to come apart because I'm getting a new drive spline shaft with a gear on it, so the bearing's got to come off of it. And there is again a snap ring. On this PC assembly, there's a double lip seal that needs to come out and be replaced. I was hoping I could get a bite on it from this side, but I guess I can't. By double lip, I mean it's got a lip on either side. It's just a single seal with two lips. And finally, a big fat O-ring to make the seal on this piece. That's the entire gear set. All cleaned up. Nothing wrong with any of the bearings. They were like new as far as I'm concerned. And here's the case ready to be filled back up. It occurred to me I probably should have cleaned the outside of the case with the knotted wire brush on the grinder while I had it outside. It's always nicer to clean outside. And all this paint doesn't need to come off, but I need to smooth it out a little bit so that it doesn't look so rough underneath the new paint. I guess I'll do that when I get the tractor back together. There are faster ways to clean parts than the way I do it. Slow and steady for me. And the reason I like doing it the way I do it is because I become more familiar with the assemblies and get a chance to really look closely at all the parts and understand how things work as I'm looking at them piece by piece. The plan going forward is to fill that transmission back up, put it back on the tractor. I'm not going into the rear end of the tractor. It's fine the way it is. There's no leaks in the axle seals or anything like that. No noises, so I'm not going to pull this all apart. I am going to pull the brakes apart and take a look at the discs and make sure that the seals aren't leaking in them. After the midsection goes back on, I can put the new clutch in and mate the tractor back up to that, the front half to the rear half. And then I can work on the front engine seal, and then I can roll the whole powertrain outside minus some other pieces I got to take off, mainly on the engine side. Clean it all up, paint the powertrain, and go from there. It's a long project. It takes a lot of patience. I enjoy it when I can do it slowly because it's my hobby. I hope you enjoyed this video too, and I'll see you next time.